Before this video begins, I just want to give a big shout out to my top tier Patreon supporters, William the Weeb and Taoist Soulweaver. You guys are legends. If you want to go above and beyond in supporting this channel, then feel free to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description as always. Anyways, let's get started. Anyone that halfway knows this channel knows how much I love the character of Knuckles, and I've made videos talking about how good he was, how bad he became, and how he's become great again, especially with his portrayal in the second film. Hell, I even stated in my discussion that it may just be my favorite incarnation of the character, and honestly, I still think that statement could very well be true. So when a Knuckles spin-off show was announced, I was ecstatic and almost surprised. I thought that if anyone was going to get a show first, it'd be Tails, but actually Knuckles was getting some good treatment and I was all there for it. I mean, there's so much that this show could have done. It could have given us some more backstory about the Echidna, it could have set up plot points that could be resolved in the third movie, or even introduce characters like Rouge or Amy. I mean, there was so many possibilities here. Well, the show's been out for over a month now, and oh boy. Yeah, it's no secret that I'm leaning kind of negatively towards this show, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it has some good aspects to it. And I will talk about these good parts as we do go through the episodes. But with all that said, let's get started with episode 1, The Warrior. For me, this is the best episode in the series, and funnily enough, it's the only episode directed by Jeff Fowler, who is the director behind the movies. You can do the math for yourself. It starts off simple enough, with some really nice action scenes of Knuckles doing cool shit like running through an obstacle course to test his skills. And we see things like the spinning post, and hey, he even uses the drill claw from Adventure 2. That's kind of awesome. Clearly setting all this up so we can see them being used throughout the show, right guys? The comedy was also pretty good here, cause much like the movies, it stems from Knuckles and his lack of understanding of human customs. So seeing things like him building a massive throne, or turning the living room into an arena, or even him just getting grounded, is genuinely funny and works with the character. In fact, that's one major compliment that I want to give the show right off the bat. It's that the character of Knuckles is actually kept consistent from the end of the second film. I don't feel like his character really regressed at all, and while he doesn't undergo any real character arc, he doesn't need to, seeing as that already happened in the second film. How Knuckles was going to be written in the show was one of my biggest concerns, but I'm genuinely happy to say that the character writing of Knuckles isn't the problem with this show. There's many other problems, but this isn't it. It's also great to see Sonic, Tails, and even Maddie show up to help make this show feel more connected to the movies. Yeah, Tom's not here, but, you know, budget. And don't you worry, I'll bring up the budget again in just a little bit. Anyways, as Knuckles is grounded, he calls to the Echidna Elders, and then Pachacamac shows up. And man, do I have some shit to talk about with this version of Pachacamac. Were you expecting the power-hungry Echidna who would push his own daughter to the side for the sake of attaining strength for his tribe? Well, suck it up, because all you get is this old and painfully unfunny rendition of the character that actually makes it tougher for me to see the Echidna tribe as this really powerful group. I mean, can you really tell me that you'd buy this old geriatric fuck as the leader of one of the deadliest tribes in the universe? Because I sure as hell can't. You guys know how much I love the backstory of Knuckles and everything to do with the Echidna, but I really don't like how it was treated as a complete joke here. I mean, look at this wise spirit smack himself into the window over and over when we know that he can literally go through objects from scenes not even 30 seconds ago. And this damn near kills any momentum for having a potential adventure adaptation unless they make some serious changes to do with the story and the Echidna's involvement. Just why? Why was this the direction to take with the character? Did they really want laughs so desperately from the children that they would literally stoop to this? I'll talk more about Pachacamac in just a bit, but story-wise, he tells Knuckles that his quest isn't over yet and that obtaining the Master Emerald was just the beginning. So maybe he tells him that he needs to guard the Master Emerald with his life and potentially have him return it to his ancestral home. kickstart a story about him guarding the Master Emerald at all costs from those who would seek it out, like a mysterious masked figure that chases him and ends up being revealed as Rouge the Bat, which, could set her character up for the third film, but no. Instead, we have him say that Knuckles needs to help Wade win a fucking bowling match cause that will somehow restore the Echidna tribe to its full glory. Are you fucking kidding me? Speaking of which, we also get reintroduced to Wade, this time in a bowling alley, and boy do I hope you like bowling, cause I tell no lies when I say that this sport makes up the crux of our main story. No, seriously, it does. Here we learn that Wade loves bowling but got beaten by a little girl and so doesn't make the team led by Jack Sinclair, who I'll talk about in a bit. And the reason he loves bowling so much is because that's what he used to do with his father, until he was abandoned as a kid in a TJ Maxx, which, is some great product placement, let me tell you. Come on down and shop at TJ Maxx, the perfect store to abandon your children and get a great bargain to start your new life. And while you're shopping, enjoy some Cool Ranch Doritos and Lay's Crisps, perfect to satiate those abandonment munchies. Yeah, the product placement is pretty egregious. We also get introduced to these two characters, Agents Mason and Willoughby, who, much like I predicted in my reaction, ended up being two very forgettable villains. They're basically just former gun agents that got sick of having a desk job when they expected more, and so now work for the buyer. Who's this guy? I may as well just talk about the buyer now, but basically he's someone who used to work for Robotnik, but escaped underground after being threatened with death after Gunn wanted to wipe out all of Robotnik's known associates after the first film. Honestly, I like how the buyer's story directly ties into the events of the first film. It helps things feel better connected and really makes the plot of the first film feel like it had much more of a fallout and domino effect that impacted more than just the main characters. The buyer basically runs a black market operation and uses quills that drop from Knuckles to create weaponry that the agents then use to fight them. So I guess the lesson here is that Sonic characters need to wear hairnets? I don't know. There genuinely could have been a good story here since the buyer is the closest that we had to a decent villain motivation, but he barely has any screen time or build up in this show. So we never get to learn about him or his character other than the fact that he resents Gunn and wants to kill them. And then he just randomly shows up in the final episode as the final fight for Knuckles, just out of nowhere. But I'll speak on that more when we get there. The agents end up tracking down Knuckles, leading to a fight scene, and to give credit where credit's due, this was actually pretty cool. And the fight scenes in general for this show are actually quite good, if a little short. This leads into my next big praise of the show, which is just how good it looks, mainly with the CGI and the effects. You'd expect them to deteriorate seeing as this is a TV show and not a movie, but it looks just as fantastic. Anyways, Knuckles is more or less handling them with ease, but gets caught off guard, allowing the agents to take advantage of the situation and use a ring to teleport Knuckles into an inescapable cage. And that's pretty much episode 1. And yeah, like I said, it's the best episode in the show for me. It's nothing particularly outstanding, but the things they did well, I think they did well enough. Unfortunately though, it just goes downhill from here. Episode 2, Don't Ever Say I Wasn't There For You, is where something becomes really clear. This ain't a Knuckles show. This is a Wade show, and our main story is simply getting Wade to Reno to win a bowling match, whilst Knuckles just accompanies him. Just to be clear, I don't hate Wade. In fact, I quite liked him for the brief moments that he was in the films as a comic relief character, but that's just it. He was there for moments and served his character's purpose of comic relief. To try and make the comic relief character a main character is an extraordinarily difficult task, and one I think the writers just didn't successfully pull off here. It's not impossible, and there have been examples of comedic characters being made into main characters, but it's rare that it's done well. Wade's character has 2 arrows in his quiver, and that's being loud and being dumb, which works in small doses like in the films, but nothing is more unfunny than the same joke being told over and over, and that's exactly what we got with Wade here. I will say that I don't hate Wade in this series, and I think that he can be funny, at times, but the series hasn't done that much to make me care about the character because I don't get a sense of growth out of him, and everything about him is treated as a joke, but I'll speak on that more in just a bit. But this episode is basically just Wade trying to save Knuckles, who is being held hostage at the Ice Cap Lounge, and we get Wade being his usual self, constantly screwing up. He gets into a fight with the two agents and somehow wins, as well as manages to rescue Knuckles. So now, any threat that these two agents could pose is all but destroyed. But hey, at least Knuckles is gliding. That's cool. We also learn, thanks to a news report, that Wade is now a wanted fugitive, and if you think that sounds familiar to a certain other movie, just wait. This leads us into episode 3, the Shabbat Dinner. And this is the episode that made me smack my fucking head into the table several times, hoping for some kind of traumatic brain injury that will let me forget about this atrocity. I genuinely never thought something so bad could come out of this movie universe, but goddamn, talk about a kick in the dick. In this episode, we're introduced to Wade's mum and his sister. The synopsis of this episode is that Wade needs a place to crash, and they all gather and have a family dinner. Does this sound like a fucking Sonic show to you? This kind of shit isn't even good by filler standards, it's just bad. It would be a fine plot for an episode of Friends or something, but this is a fucking Sonic show. And no, none of the jokes during this dreadful dinner scene were funny at all. It was actually painful to sit through, especially the whole Jim Gun Agent bit, it just hurt. At the very least, the first 2 episodes could make me laugh with some good jokes. There was at least some evidence of good writing. But no, not here. And these jokes just go on and on and on. Seriously, this whole dinner table sequence should have only lasted about a minute or so, but they just kept it going to kill time. As for the newcomers, well, let's start with the mother who, well, she has no character. Seriously, none. The only halfway interesting thing is that she learnt Krav Maga, which is a form of martial arts, but other than that, she just exists to, I guess, be disappointed in her children and teach us about Judaism. Oh, and let's not forget about the Holocaust joke, because you got me there. I didn't find it funny, and I love dark and offensive comedy. But hey, if that humor isn't good enough for you, then we have sex jokes, because I don't even know anymore. This is supposed to be a Sonic show. But then there's Wanda. Jesus fucking Christ, Wanda. This is, without a doubt, the worst human character in the franchise. No, just the worst character in the franchise, period. I genuinely thought I couldn't hate a human character more than Chris Thorndike, but she makes him look like a fucking Giga Chad by comparison. Hell, even Princess Elise is a million times more tolerable than her. No offense to the actress, I'm sure she's good at her job, but this performance is just not good. She constantly talks like a bratty little child and just does not shut up. Not to mention that she's just an asshole. I mean, this psycho straight up stabs Wade and acts like nothing happened. How this bitch got a job with the FBI is something I will never understand. This is one of the worst characters I've ever witnessed, not just in Sonic, but in fiction. I didn't think there was much that could surpass my hatred of Cho-Cho, but goddamn. How there were any writers that greenlit this bullshit is beyond me. Anyways, we learn that Wade's dad is actually going to be in the bowling tournament, and that's why he wants to go there, and that's pretty much all the plot-relevant story we have in this episode. There's also a small scene where Knuckles reveals that during his search for the Master Emerald, he was actually ambushed by his enemies and left for dead. Forced to traverse through a desert in space for 2 weeks, and I just want you to keep that story in the back of your head for just a little bit. But then, bounty hunters suddenly attacked the house because this episode needed something interesting to happen, and I'll be honest, this fight scene was actually pretty good. Especially that bit with the panning camera shot around the kitchen, I genuinely liked that. Episode 4, a very controversial episode, and with good reason. It starts with Wade getting kidnapped by Jack Sinclair, you know, that very memorable character from the first episode that you definitely didn't forget about. He gets locked in an electric cage, and so of course, Knuckles comes in to help him. Oh, who am I kidding, man? That would cost too much money. So instead, Wade is left on his own, and Knuckles speaks to him through a phone. and in doing so teaches him about an echidna meditation method that ends up transporting him to a bowling alley with Pachacamac.
Flashback.
Honestly, there better be a really fucking good reason behind his being here in this show, because this is the kind of shit that can really impact the future of this connected universe. I really hope they haven't just thrown him in here as a cheap gag, because in my opinion that would be a huge disservice, especially after how well they've handled the franchise thus far.
End of flashback.
And if you thought this was going to be a serious moment where Pachacamac imparts genuine wisdom, then prepare to be disappointed, because instead, we get an overly long musical in the form of a rock opera. A musical that's so fucking long, we actually get a break in between it. I almost want to like this episode, I really do, mainly because of the presentation with this whole cheap theater musical kind of thing going on. It's actually kind of charming. Except that this whole episode treats everything about Knuckles and his past like a joke. And sadly, it's the closest we get to any kind of Sonic lore making its way into the show. The title of this episode is The Flames of Disaster, which is a direct reference to Sonic 06 and to Iblis, but I'm starting to think that it's just a code name for this show. The musical itself, though, tells the story of Knuckles, including how, at some point during his travels, he ended up defeating Iblis and unlocked the Flames of Disaster, a power-up that we'll be seeing later. Now, I originally had my doubts that they would ever adapt 06 into a film, so seeing them still using components of it but altering it to work more with this universe is something that I genuinely like. But the problem here is that we're told about these events, but we don't get to see them. Imagine how fucking cool it would have been to have seen this fight actually take place. That's the kind of shit that should be in a Knuckles show. But no, instead we get a budget performance that has Iblis shopping on fucking Facebook Marketplace because fuck good writing and action, we need another product placement. You know, with this much product placement, I'm impressed that the show managed to have any kind of budget issues at all, but I'll talk about that in just a bit. Hell, if we go back to episode 3, Knuckles talks about how he traversed a space desert for 14 days, but we never get to see it. That would have made for an incredible episode of a Knuckles show. An episode where we really see Knuckles being tested, on the verge of giving up, barely able to continue until he starts to hallucinate or even passes out. And then we flash back to his younger self training with Pachacamac. And we see that Pachacamac prioritizes strength and combat more than anything else, which shows us more about the confrontational nature of his character, which not only follows the writing from Adventure 1, but could also pave the way for a potential adventure adaptation in a future movie. Then maybe Knuckles goes to his father and it's him that tells Knuckles that physical strength is only half the warrior and you must show mental fortitude as well. And so it's actually his father that teaches him the echidna meditation method that we see Knuckles teaching Wade in the episode. Then Knuckles uses this meditation method to find the strength to escape the desert and continue his search for the Master Emerald. This not only gives us some introspection with Knuckles, but also gives us our first glimpses of Pachacamac, to really set up his character as being this power-hungry person. Cause as of now, Pachacamac's character is a fucking joke. I will never buy this incarnation of the character as being the leader of this strong and dominant tribe. Anyways, after this shit show, Wade suddenly gets powers and busts out of the cage, and then these powers are just completely forgotten about for the rest of the series with no explanation for any of this. God, this writing is so lazy. He then defeats Jack Sinclair, and then him and Knuckles ride to Reno on a motorcycle, with Knuckles now donning his hat from the OVA, which I'll admit is a nice touch. But then, of course, you have Wanda and his mother trailing right behind them, because where would we be without these vital characters? And that's the episode. Again, I can see why some people do enjoy this one. The fact that we get to see some Sonic stuff in this episode is genuinely pretty nice, and there is a charm to this cheap theater performance. But knowing that we just can't see Knuckles do cool stuff like fighting Iblis kind of just makes it all bittersweet. It really says a lot when this is the closest we get to a Sonic story in a show called Knuckles. Episode 5, Reno Baby, or as I call it, another filler episode. Literally nothing important happens in this episode except that we meet Wade's father, Pistol Pete, and we also get some bowling montages, and I hope to God you like bowling montages because the next episode will really test your patience. The closest we get to a story here is that Wade reunites with his dad, and then they get along for about 5 minutes until it turns out that the dad actually teamed up with the two agents who are now holding Wanda and the mother hostage in exchange for Knuckles. Wow, who would have seen that coming? Such riveting storytelling we have right there. And yeah, Knuckles is barely in this episode, but that's not even a surprise anymore. Weirdly, there's a moment where they do try to be serious about Wade and the whole thing with his abandonment, with the mother trying to warn Wade about his father, but it doesn't go anywhere. Cause this show has given us no reason to care about this. A huge problem that I notice with this show is that everything is treated as a joke, including Wade himself. So anytime they try to be serious about him and his past, it doesn't work. Cause a few seconds later, they'll undercut it with a joke because it's a comedy and we can't let the audience feel any kind of sadness for more than 1/8 of a second. Yes, this show is primarily aimed at a younger audience, but there is a history of kids media exploring more serious topics, including the Sonic franchise, like with how Black Knight explores the concepts of life and death. And I'm not saying that you have to get rid of the comedy either, but there is an art to knowing when to be comedic and when not to be. Plus, it helps if the comedy is good, which in this show is kind of 50-50. Something like child abandonment is ripe for exploration and could have been used to take a comic relief character like Wade and make him feel much more three-dimensional. Maybe if we got a flashback to him as a child being left in the store, only to have an officer come and reassure him and pick him up to return him to his family. You know, that's the kind of stuff that could have helped us empathize with his character. And it also gives us a reason as to why he would want to be an officer, because it was a policeman that helped him, and so now he wants to help people that might have suffered as he did. The show does nothing to explore this abandonment plotline and only treats it as a joke, so when they do try to be serious, it just feels insincere. Hell, this show always brings up how important music is to Wade, so maybe they could have gone out of their way to show us that Wade uses this music as a form of escapism to forget about his past. But they never do anything like this. Instead, they waste our time with bullshit dinner scenes and jokes about Jim Gun Agent. Why? Anyways, we're on to the final episode, and it's definitely an episode. Knuckles ends up fighting the two agents, and then they get killed. No, seriously, they were fired into a vacuum, they're gone. And all I can say about this is...
Good riddance.
And suddenly bowling! Again. And I mean, Christ, they really spend way too much time on this. I mean, several minutes of a montage sequence that just gets boring and repetitive. I feel like I'm watching something completely different, like one of those generic early 2000s direct-to-DVD films. And as all this happens, the buyer, yeah, remember him, suddenly shows up out of nowhere in this mech suit that, looks okay, I guess, and proceeds to fight Knuckles. Sorry for jumping back and forth between these plot lines, but this is exactly how it happens in the show, and it's so pace-breaking. This fight should have been the focus of the episode, but instead we get another cutback to the fucking bowling tournament, cause who wants to see Knuckles fight the main villain when we can watch more fucking bowling? After Wade wins, Knuckles is thrown through the wall and is beaten unconscious by the buyer. Wade then jumps into the fight and uses the glove powered by the quill that Mason used earlier to... throw bowling balls at the buyer whilst giving a speech about friendship and the importance of Knuckles. To which Knuckles wakes up and takes his power back from the quill. This is just the ending to the first film. Literally, 1-to-1, except worse, because I have no serious attachment to any of these characters except Knuckles and maybe Wade. I would care a little more about this fight if the buyer was actually well written like Robotnik was, but because we haven't got the chance to spend any time with him, and anything we do know about him was told to us through exposition, we don't care about him, and by proxy, don't care about this fight. Anyways, Knuckles unlocks the Flames of Disaster power-up, which admittedly looks badass, and like I said in my reaction, I am a complete sucker for any kind of reference to Sonic heroes. He then swiftly deals with the buyer by literally crushing him to death. Holy shit. And there goes a villain with so much wasted potential. The episode then comes to an extremely anticlimactic end with Knuckles and Wade high-fiving each other, and that's that. That was the Knuckles show. Or should I say, the Wade show. And I think that's my biggest gripe with all of this. This is called the Knuckles show, and yet he's on screen for maybe 20% of the runtime tops. I mean, this borders on false advertising. Look at the trailer. Knuckles was there, center stage. This was advertised to us as a Knuckles show, but it isn't. This is a Wade show that happens to have Knuckles in it, when the budget allows for it. And I do want to stress that I don't inherently hate the idea of a Knuckles and Wade team up, but the execution here was just poor. I will admit they do have a couple of nice interactions, but again, it's just not explored enough. Honestly, I think this show should have just been called Wade and Knuckles. Simple. It would have told us directly that Wade is the focus whilst also being an homage to the name of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But Paramount could never do that, because who would watch a show with Wade as the main character? They had to advertise this as a Knuckles show, otherwise nobody would watch. Which begs the question, why focus on Wade? When people click on a show called Knuckles, they expect to watch a show about Knuckles. Just like when people watch the Sonic movies, they don't watch them for the human characters, they watch them for the Sonic characters. Because those films are called Sonic the Hedgehog. And if it really is the budget that's the issue, then I honestly think they should have made this an animated series. That probably would have made things a little easier on the budget and could have allowed the story to be about Knuckles and his adventures across the galaxy, rather than Wade Whipple's adventures to win a bowling game. Or if they didn't want to make it animated, then cut its length down. There's only 6 episodes in this series, and so much of it is just wasted time. This genuinely could have been cut down to 3 episodes and accomplished the same levels of disappointment. Or maybe it could have just been made into an hour-long special or something. But it astonishes me that people will say that budget is the issue with this show when they clearly had plenty of money to pay for all the licensed songs that they used throughout this, which, again, is just disappointing. Why don't they use any game tracks or even remixes of them? I guess they're trying to target a casual audience, but come on guys, the franchise's music is royalty within the video gaming space. Damn near everyone agrees, Sonic fan or not, that Sonic music is among the best out there, so why not capitalize on it? I mean, for fuck's sake, we had an entire concert celebrating the music for the 30th anniversary. If that doesn't tell you how good the music is, I don't know what will. But even past all these problems and budget issues, this entire show is just not that well written. Sure, I enjoyed the first episode, but past that it just gets worse with maybe a few good moments here and there. But that's the problem. They're just moments when those moments should have been the whole show. At the very least, as I mentioned earlier, Knuckles himself is still well written and in character. That's pretty much the one ray of light in the pitch darkness of this show. I do truly believe that this should have been a show set in the past that focused on Knuckles and the adventures he went on whilst in search of the Master Emerald. Or, if not that, then a show that would implement characters like Rouge to set them up for the 3rd movie, so that more time could be focused onto Shadow and his character development. These would have felt more like Sonic shows compared to the mess that we actually got, because what we did get just doesn't feel like a Sonic show made for Sonic fans, and that's the part that gets to me the most, because the movies clearly were. As much as they did pander to casual audiences at times, like with the flossing and playing famous songs from the 90s and early 2000s, you also got this sense of sincerity and respect that the people behind the films had for the franchise, and that's just not something I sense with this show. And what scares me the most is that this show was a huge success, so Paramount will look at this and go, yes, we can make more shows just like this that barely feature the title character and focus on the most mundane of storylines to save as much money as possible and turn a profit, and I just don't want that to be the fate of this movie universe. I mean, what's next? A team-up show between Tails and JoJo, or Shadow and Rachel? I dunno, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I set my expectations too high for this show, but at the same time, is it so wrong that I want a Knuckles show to be about Knuckles. Ultimately, this show has just left me disappointed, and that saddens me because I genuinely love this movie universe, and they've done so much right, only to fall flat here. My final rating for The Wade Show is a below average score of 4 out of 10. And I genuinely considered giving this show a 5 or a 6 out of 10, because I do genuinely enjoy Knuckles and his character in this show. But the problem is that it's kind of hard to mess up a character that doesn't show up. I guess the best I can say about this is that this is just a TV show and probably won't impact future movies, but at the same time that doesn't excuse this TV show for being bad. I just hope that the third movie turns out to be as fantastic as we all expect it to be, but as always, only time will tell. Well, thank you all for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and turn notifications on to keep up with all future content. If you want to go above and beyond in supporting the channel, then why not check out my Patreon? The link is in the description as always. And speaking of which, a massive thank you to all my patrons. You guys are legends. But with all that said, I'll see all you guys in the next video.